Great. Welcome back to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. It is Friday, the last day of January. And you are here and we're going to continue to do our work on housing today. And we're going to address different aspects, the cost drivers and the inflation that are really having, sadly, a huge impact on the volume of building and the speed of the building that we are able to do here in the state. So to begin our conversation, Kurt, we are looking forward to Kurt Nasser launching this discussion. Welcome, Kurt. You would introduce yourself, and then we will introduce ourselves actually first, because I'm not sure you know everybody.
I'm Chittenden. I represent Chittenden Southeast, 11 communities in the southeast of Chittenden County.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor District, one of the 3 senators for Windsor District. We represent 25 communities on the Connecticut River and west into the center of.
Good morning, Dave Weeks, representing Rutland County, which is comprised of 27 communities.
Hey, it's a competition. Now we're going to find out about Franklin. Anyway, as you have getting a concept, we represent a large number of communities, all with varying needs.
Nice. And I am Kurt Nasser. I live in Essex Junction and I work for PC Construction based out of South Burlington.
Great. Thank you. Take it away.
All right. Okay, so thank you very much for having me. The next 20 to 25 minutes will be a presentation about building in the state of Vermont and about the construction climate here. This is an exciting topic. I got a nice title. It's a good hook to pull people in. So let's chat about it. Today's discussion is going to cover factors at play. And with that, why Vermont has a competitive disadvantage in the housing game. We're going to look at a case study between building in Vermont versus building in New Hampshire. And then we're going to get into summary, takeaway, and then some questions and answers. Right. Okay, so let's start a little bit about me so you know some more about myself. I'm a director of pre-construction with PC Construction based out of South Burlington. And what that means, I'm involved on the estimating and pre-construction side, getting the projects ramped up and ready to put a shovel in the ground. I started my career in operations, so out in the field, project engineer, all the way up to project manager before getting into estimating. I represent about 20 full-time estimators for our company. I'm the face of our estimating products that are going out the door. And I've been part of the team to develop over 1.7 million square feet of housing. And that's in the Northeast, not specifically Vermont. And that's over 1,600 units. Okay, and let's talk about fun Kurt there for a little bit. So this picture was taken this summer at a taco party. And let's face it, the only thing more fun than a taco party is talking to a Senate committee about construction costs, right? So I live in Essex Junction, as I said, with my wife and 2 sons. The taco on the left there is 6.5, and the burrito is 2.5. Fun facts about me: I am a 3-season youth coach. So I coach my son's baseball team, soccer team, and right now we are into skiing. So I'm a ski coach down at Killington Mountain.
Thank you.
Yes.
On their Friday program?
So their Saturday program, their Future Stars through the Killington Mountain School. Yep. Okay, and quick brief about PC. So here are some of our notable projects that we've done in Vermont, going left to right, top, and then to the bottom. Beta Technologies in the upper left. We've done a ton of work at Spruce Peak at Stowe as part of their master plan. UVM STEM in the upper right, lower left-hand corners Hotel Vermont in downtown Burlington. Waterbury State Office Complex, bottom middle, and then Southern Vermont Medical Center. So this is really spans the gamut of our different market segments: education and campus, health and life science, hospitality and resort, manufacturing and industrial, water and wastewater, and then most important, and what we're here to talk about today, multifamily construction, that housing component.
And what percent is for you is residential versus commercial?
So for us, we would say it's commercial, but it's the multifamily residential component. But of our book of business, maybe that's 15 to 20% of what we do.
The multifamily.
Yes, yep. And we have 8 regional offices in total, 4 in the Northeast, headquartered in South Burlington, but then offices in New York, New Hampshire, and Maine.
We're glad you're still headquartered here.
Yes, I am too. Okay, so factors at play. Why is building in the state of Vermont? Why does it come at a cost premium? I'm going to have some tables, graphs, numbers, dollar signs on the following slides. So let's prepare to dork out a little bit here. Okay, available resources. So this is looking at employees, both total private employees. So I have a couple columns here. All employees are total private sector employees. Construction workers are those that identify as construction workers. And then the far 2 right columns have the actual quantity of those workers, all employees or construction workers. So I'm going to start at the bottom and kind of work my way up nationally. And this table goes to show the growth since the pandemic. So since back in February of 2020. So at a national level, we've grown the total private sector by about 5% since the pandemic. The construction workers is outpacing that by about 100% there. So that's up 9% nationally. I'm going to skip up to New Hampshire. So New Hampshire is leading the Northeast in construction worker growth, with 11% increase in construction workers since the pandemic, and a little bit below the national average for total private sector employees. Maine is doing well, a little bit below the national average, 3% in total private sector and 8% growth in construction workers. And then we come to our wonderful state of Vermont, which is lagging big time in construction worker growth. Total private sector has only increased by 0.2% since the pandemic. And construction workers is just outpacing that by a little bit, a little over 1% growth. And you'll see on the far right, so Vermont has right now 15,500 construction workers. And it's been around that number for about a decade. So for the visual learners like myself, I have some graphs here to help show that. I think a graph tells a better story sometimes than the table. And I know this is small, and that's fine. I will describe it here. The blue line is construction workers. The red line is is all employees, which is total private sector. And then the gray bar on the left side of those graphs is the pandemic. That's back in February of 2020. These are index values tied to that point there. And so looking at the lower right-hand corner, that's the national average. So we're seeing growth, and we're seeing an uptick in construction worker growth since the pandemic. Looking at the upper right-hand corner, that's New Hampshire. So New Hampshire grew from 5% more than total private sector to 6 to 7 to 8% more than total private sector. Lower left-hand corner is Maine, where we're seeing construction worker growth outpace total private sector. You know, we have a little dip at the end there. Maybe that was lobster season or something like that. But it looks like it's coming back up. Or one day of summer. That's right. That's right. People get that day off. And then upper left is Vermont with basically flat lines on growth. So that is a concern, available resources, because when it comes to construction costs, less labor availability leads to higher costs. There's less people to do the work. There's more of a premium paid for those. So let's look at construction wages.
Have you also a graph for looking at the population of our school age high school kids?
I haven't done that exercise. I like that though.
For all our efforts, I mean, sadly, as you know, we have a declining high school population. So it would be interesting to graph onto this what the school age population is.
Yeah.
Because that's part of your funnel. And so, I mean, anyway.
Yes, no, I like that. That's a good point. Yep. Okay, looking at construction wages. So Vermont here is at the highest on the left. New Hampshire, surprisingly, on the last slide, I said New Hampshire is able to hire and build their construction workforce. They're up 11% since the pandemic, yet here we're paying them the least amount compared to Vermont and Maine. Maine is pretty high. It's close to the cost in Vermont. So over the past 7 years, Vermont wages have outpaced New Hampshire wages by 7.5% for construction. And
Question,
yes,
that is in terms of the wage rate were adjusted so that you listed after-tax wages, but after income tax wages, opposed to taxable wages, which is what I assume your chart does. Would you think it showed any difference?
if it was potentially, yes, yep.
On that, we're hearing testimony that Vermont is the most expensive healthcare in the nation, so I don't think these numbers really come from what that's coming out of people's paychecks.
Right.
You net available cash after
Mhm.
essential expenses and taxation.
That would be an
Different
additional,
number.
that would be an interesting additional. Right.
Yeah. And then Vermont has outpaced Maine by about 1% over the past 7 years. All right, this graph here looks at, so construction workers get paid a premium compared to the average private sector wage. And that's due to a number of factors. Construction, it's dirty, it's physical, it's cold outside. If you're doing siding outside right now, it's cold. There's often travel involved. So there is a premium paid for construction. What this graph is showing is that before the pandemic, that premium was more. It was 21%. Since the pandemic, we've seen an uptick in total, uptick in private sector average wages. So that premium is less. So that makes it harder to recruit people into the construction trade because there's less of a premium paid. Locally in Chittenden County, there's bagel places that are paying $25 an hour to schmutz cream cheese on bagels. And that's the type of wage that we're competing with for laborers, carpenters, that kind of thing. All right, and then we're going to talk about energy requirements. This is the third factor at play. We talked about available resources, we talked about construction wages, and now we're going to talk about energy requirements. So back in 2020, as I'm sure you all know, Vermont legislature passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, creating legally binding emission reduction requirements. So with that, we're looking at the orange portion of this graph here, which is thermal, related back to housing and building standards. So back in 2020, Vermont had the 2020 Commercial Building Energy Standard, and with that, the Residential Building Energy Standard. Just recently, as of July 1st of this past year, we had the 2024 CBs, Commercial Building Energy Standard, that came out, and we would expect an update to that in about 3 years. But what we're seeing with every iteration of the Commercial Building Energy Standard, the energy code becomes more stringent. Values go up, insulation values go up, and our building standards improve. Looking at this slide here, this is a comparison between Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, based on their building standards. So, and what I have illustrated here is the insulation requirements for exterior walls, foundations, underslab insulation, roof insulation. So we're really focusing on the insulation values. And with an R value, so the higher the number, the more insulation is part of that assembly. And with that, the higher the cost, because you're paying for more insulation. So we're comparing living here in Vermont and building here in Vermont. We're comparing back to Maine and New Hampshire, which are essentially the Wild West of energy policy that haven't been updated in 6 to 9 years. And we in Vermont are building to a substantially higher standard than our neighboring states. But with that comes a cost. In addition to insulation, which I have shown in this table, there's increased window performance, increased air barrier performance, lower door testing, solar ready zones, electric energy storage, system ready requirements. With each of these, you can say cha-ching in your head because it adds money to the cost of construction. Electric readiness for the future, energy efficient credit requirements, renewable and load management credits, to name some.
I can't remember if someone had quantified it was like a $30,000 increase per unit on average, something like that.
Yes, and that's what we're seeing, 30 to 40,000 per unit of an ad.
And that might go up with tariffs.
It's-
Everything's,
Yeah, there's a lot of things that'll go
So
up.
that's
there,
going
so,
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so however, what we don't see is the savings as a result to the homeowner going forward.
Yes,
I mean, I think that's yes. When you ask which house where would you rather live?
yeah,
Which unit would you like to live in? I'd rather, and what would be also helpful is to see what the energy savings is. You just lost yourself in that. What the energy savings is as a result in those 3 states.
I think our job too, though, is Jason Webster's pointed this out in emails about RVs in the past. It at some point makes someone decide to take a very energy inefficient home because they can't afford a new house. So they're worse off.
I agree, but the objective and the reasons we've supported a lot of the work that's added to these costs in the hope of A, reducing our emissions, and B, reducing costs in the future for our residents. And so that would be a helpful addition to Jillian. We lost.
Coming back.
Oh, your workout back,
Come on.
right?
yeah.
Well, one of the issues also is the reduction in cost. When? If the reduction in cost is for the third owner down the road, it doesn't benefit the person who's doing it right now.
Well, if it's new construction.
Oops, sorry.
Cost.
So but I agree with you, Chair, that it's important to make the financial argument that this insulation can benefit the future owners so that it's makes it easier to swallow. One thing that I do hear from developers in my area are some of the standards or requirements around like e-bikes. And right now, a friend's trying to build this new dental facility and he's being asked to spend an extra $500,000-$600,000 on an indoor e-bike parking space or place.
Being asked.
Required by-
I mean,
So it's just that, I'm just curious if you would reflect on beyond insulation, any other energy requirements that don't necessarily have the payback that insulation has. Are you seeing that in your?
Yeah, let me hit on 2 things. So when developers build, they're either building condos or they're building apartments. And with either of those, they're setting the utilities up to be paid by either the renter or the condo owner, whoever buys it. So they're subdividing those utilities, which makes sense so that everybody can control their thermostat in their unit, keep it as hot or cold as they want. But when people are buying a house, they're looking at the first cost. They're looking at what's my mortgage going to be? What's my rent going to be? The second cost of utility savings pales in comparison to what they're looking at as either their mortgage payment or what they're going to pay for rent.
And the next one, what they're paying tax and what they pay in energy.
Yes.
costs.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think those are tax and energy.
So there is savings on the utility front, but they pale in comparison to the ad for the first cost of construction. We're seeing big ads, 30 to 40,000 per unit. And I mean, how many years does it take in utility bill savings to pay off 30 to 40,000? A couple lifetimes, probably.
especially with interest rates.
Yes.
Well, for
Yeah.
those of us who own sieves of homes, it
Yeah.
might just be a
Right.
year or two.
Yeah. Yep.
In my case, it was 13 years.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. I share all our equipment for all.
Okay, so here's a case study looking at a project that we're building currently in Manchester, New Hampshire, and comparing that back to if this project was to be lifted up, located in Vermont. So this project is 142 apartment units, middle income housing. Manchester, New Hampshire, as I said, covers 2 buildings and 160,000 square feet. So here is looking at those building insulation properties. the middle column there is what was provided, what is essentially the code minimum. I hate to use that term, but basically what the building in New Hampshire was built to. And the right column is what it would be if it was built in Vermont.
Right.
And you'll see that the right column, every value there is at least equal or higher to what was provided in New Hampshire. So,
And may I just ask,
Yeah.
while we're on this, of those, which is the biggest cost driver? Because some of it doesn't mean.
y- yeah, I would say it's a mix between the top one, which would be roof insulation, because that covers, that covers the square footage of the floor plate, and then the wall insulation. That would be the third one down, walls above grade.
Yes. Yeah.
We also last year had some headlines about poorly done insulation. So I think one of the things I've heard from builders is if you get a good builder who's just doing a good job with your house, it's going to be durable and it's going to be comfortable and warm. If you are cutting corners and just trying to meet a code, you could have people who do a really poor job of that insulation that is then costly and really distressing.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of these insulation requirements are hard to mess up because they're continuous insulation. Say on the roof, it's got to be covered in its entirety. For the wall insulation, it's continuous on the outside of the building, and it's part of the sheathing that holds the siding. So again, it's harder to have gaps in that. But there's.
And sorry, just I want to point out on each of these are opportunities, I understand, for certification and credentials that in each of these subcategories of sort of subcontracting categories. Which of these do we offer? Do you know? And well, it doesn't need to be right now, but I'd love to know which of these we actually offer certification and or further credentialing on in opportunities in Vermont.
Okay.
But you're saying, what was the issue that we had headlines around with insulation?
All I'm saying here is that the insulation requirements are more than our neighboring states.
Right.
And we're building to a higher standard than New Hampshire made.
But are we doing a good job of it?
I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say we are. It's just coming at a big cost premium. And so here's a summary of what that impact is. Total premium is up 10 to 15%. 2 to 4% is in the insulation, building enclosure, the window scope of work. 3 to 6% premium in mechanical, electrical, plumbing. That's the MEP there. And then we have all the specialty Vermont items on the right side that are more stringent than other states. And then on top of that, we come back to labor resources. New Hampshire has way more construction workers.
Sorry, I just, before you zip along here, the 800K is just general cost premium in divisions of the other page 7 and 8.
Yes, of divisions 7 and 8. Divisions 7 and 8 are building insulation, building enclosure, windows. Yep.
Installation. Okay.
That's the previous question I asked. And so are you struggling with local additional Vermont items? So at the municipal level?
Yes, and so on the
Your lip is bleeding.
hold on. Thank you.
Here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so on the right-hand side are those specialty Vermont
Okay.
items that are so electric energy storage system ready. So that's in the future. If there's a battery system, it's ready, but we're putting in conduit. We're creating space so that we can put those systems in the future.
Not for single family homes though, but for multi-units.
Yes. Yep.
And
commercial. Yep.
David.
So you've created an illustration comparing us to New Hampshire and Maine, but the whole latitude across the United States and Canada and such, where do we fall into that?
We are on. I don't know if I can say that we are the highest, but we are in the top tier.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're in the
of-
top tier
of-
of Minnesota.
of
I mean, there's
energy
some other
policy.
very
Mhm.
states that are real, we're not alone.
Yes. Yep. But yeah, there are a lot of Vermont specific items that we need to hit along the way. And I'll go back. Yeah, so we are seeing.
Before you leave this slide, which apply to residential versus commercial? I assume a lot of this, just reading this list, is pretty mostly multifamily or commercial. Is that right?
Yes, everything here is multifamily or commercial. There's been a lot of strides in the CVs, Commercial Building Energy Standard, to link multifamily very closely with the RV standard, which makes sense. So yes, everything here applies to commercial multifamily.
And so, and that is, I think, what we're really looking at overall. This is not for single individual family.
Yes,
Yeah,
correct.
although my guess is a lot of it translates.
that's right. Mhm.
Correct.
And yeah, we are seeing a $30,000 to $40,000 premium for per unit to address these items.
Yeah.
So in summary, we talked about the factors that play: available resources, construction wages, energy requirements. Some summary talking points here. Are we in a housing emergency? I would say yes. And we need to take an aggressive stance on that and look at lowering the cost of building housing. We are at a competitive disadvantage with our neighboring states. I would say on average, I get a phone call once a month from a new developer that is looking to build housing in Vermont. And they reach out, they're excited, they have funding, they're ready to build, they're looking at land to buy, until they hear what the cost of construction is and what the permit timeline is. And then they're out of Vermont. No matter how much I plead with them to build housing in Vermont, they move on to the next state where they can build in New Hampshire, they can build in Maine for cheaper and get the same rents or higher rents than they are here in Vermont. So we really have to look at reducing costs. Permitting timeline, I didn't talk about it much during this presentation, but that needs some advances. There has been some Act 250 advances. It's still not going far enough. And I haven't seen an appreciable difference yet in that.
But that's only been put in play in the last year.
Yes, yep, that's true.
So, I mean, give
Yep. Give it time.
I'm trying to quantify costs and delays related to A&R permits.
yeah.
So if you could forward those
Mhm.
to our committee, that would be very helpful. I keep hearing from folks that is a lot of the bulk of it, but I don't have a lot of help from A&R right now to figure out what's working, what's federally required, what is the biggest delay. So I need help from others.
We need help. And to tag onto that, one of the things we have been trying to do in this committee is align permitting, and reduce duplication. So as much as you have been able in your work to identify areas that we could reduce duplication into, that'd be great, Randy.
And above all, the timeline, and the time comparison between jurisdictions, between states, from beginning to end, taking into account all of the various kinds of permitting, municipal, regional, statewide, et cetera. All of that would be very helpful to see some comparisons.
Okay.
I think we all have our suspicions as to what the comparisons are going to show, but it would be nice to see it objectively.
But some of it's founded and some of it we know isn't, and some of it actually lies elsewhere, like ANR. I think we have some issues with ANR more than other places.
As a potential spoiler,
We didn't have this, so we weren't specific, but I don't know if they do. That's, I think, a question to all the presenters.
Was that,
permitting timelines, any kind of comparison, any kind of like some visual to show net impact of.
we could, sorry, Kathy by Evernorth, we could work on something like that. I do want to be aware we have two other witnesses. So
Yes, so I'd like to move us along if we can. Kurt, thank you. You have one more summer upper? No.
Nope, that's it.
Kurt, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
This was, I hope you'll continue to be a resource for us.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Great.
Love to.
Terrific. Thank you. You teed us up well.
Staying.
Cool.
Yeah, we have two chairs here. Kurt, thank you.
Yes.
So Kathy, we're gonna do Eric online on Zoom.
It is.
Kurt, that was terrific.
Thank you.
Are we next to Eric? Eric, welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, can we make you a little louder?
I don't know.
That's perfect.
How's that?
We make him full screen. That's great. Were you here when we introduced ourselves, Eric?
I was not. I had a little bit of a childcare snafu this morning, but the baby fell asleep, and so here I am.
I thank you. I love your background. It's the most exciting background we've seen in a long time. Why don't we
Thanks.
start with Thomas?
Hi, Eric. My name is Thomas Chittenden. I represent 11 communities in the southeast of Chittenden County. So does Keisha.
Hi, Eric. Keisha Romney. Phil.
Hey.
Hi,
Good to see you.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor District.
Randy Brock, I represent Franklin County and part of Grand Isle County, which is the northwestern corner of the block.
Good morning, Dave Weeks, Rutland County.
Welcome. Introduce yourself.
Thank Sure. My name is Eric Hoekstra. I am the managing partner at Redstone. Redstone is a real estate investment, development, and property management firm based in downtown Burlington. We've been in business for over 30 years. We are very active in Chittenden County, a little bit in Franklin County, a little bit in central Vermont, and then other parts of New England as well, northern New England, New Hampshire, Maine, and then a little bit around the Albany and Saratoga County area of New York. I've been involved in real estate for over 25 years. I started my career in Vermont with Kathy at what was Housing Vermont at the time. I've been a nonprofit affordable housing developer. I've been a for-profit developer of commercial and multifamily projects. Redstone has been involved in the rehab and construction of somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 apartments in Chittenden County. So we know a little bit about the topic at hand today. I didn't prepare anything on a formal basis. The main points that I wanted to convey to this group is, as far as I can tell, construction costs since 2019 are up about 50%. Which is a massive number. Inflation somewhere on the order of 10% a year, which is well ahead of any general inflation statistics that all of us are aware of. What has long been a housing crisis has only gotten more challenging. I haven't built a new apartment in over 5 years. We completed our last project in November of 2019. And I haven't been able to make a pro forma work since that moment in time.
Eric, in Vermont or generally?
Anywhere.
Just in Vermont?
Vermont is the only place that I've attempted to develop apartments. The projects I'm involved in outside of Vermont tend to be commercial projects, mostly warehouse distribution, manufacturing facilities, that kind of stuff.
Right.
The cost issues, the supply chain issues, the labor issues that everyone is acutely aware of now were there pre-pandemic. We saw all of this stuff coming the pandemic certainly has exacerbated some of these issues, but these issues are not things that developed as a result purely of pandemic times or anything that has occurred since then. Part of what I wanted to try to convey to everyone right now is, as challenging as it is today to make the numbers work to create new housing, I think the time is right for us to be working on policy, to put the policy in place to enable creation of housing in the future. There will be a moment in time when I can get back to work. I don't know when that will be, but it will come around. The market moves in cycles. There was a long period of time before we developed a lot of the housing that we developed most recently, where the numbers didn't work then, and then they did work for a period of time. I also wanted to say, in the past, I think we've squandered opportunity when we've had it. There was a period of time between 2012 or so and 2019 when market conditions did support development of new housing, but the barriers were so high, we didn't create as much housing as we could have. And that's why I think it's critically important now for us to work on real regulatory reform to remove some of those barriers. The housing crisis that we have, in some ways, we've created this crisis. And we've created it with policies that are generally well-intentioned, but the compounding impact of these policies creates hurdles, creates barriers, creates costs. When we require certain energy code that's way beyond federal standards, when we have environmental standards that are way beyond EPA standards, when we impose affordability requirements, you name it, all of these things add cost. And all of these things add regulatory hurdles that make it more challenging to develop and create the housing that we all know we need. We need to start knocking down these barriers. And I'm not saying, open the floodgates and, turn Vermont into a place none of us want it to be. But we need to start knocking down some of these barriers, or we're never going to catch up.
Right.
And now I think is the moment in time to do some of that good work, to create a dynamic that when we can get back at this, we can really, make the next cycle where housing development is more possible. We can make the most of it.
Thank you, Eric. As you know, we have begun that work. We have been sort of devoted to that work for the last 2 years. And I assume you're familiar with our work in the Home Act and in Act 181, where we have begun to do.
I'm familiar. I appreciate it. And we need to do more.
Yeah. Well, and actually, if you'd like to send us a list of some of the areas you think we could reduce duplication in, align permits, we would appreciate that. So, thank you.
I think just generally, I think the tendency I've seen in the 25 years that I've been in Vermont is we come up with great ideas, but then we add new red tape to layer on top of those new great ideas. And we need to get away from that. We say we want to do this. We want to make it possible, easier to develop housing in the places, the smart growth kind of locations that we all say we want it. But then we create 12 requirements that you have to meet in order to develop the housing in those places that we say we all want it. And now whatever incentives we thought we were creating aren't really there.
Oh, thanks, Eric. I'd appreciate, given that we are also the Committee of Workforce, you said really that the top challenges at the moment were labor and just costs, material costs and things. We'd appreciate your thoughts on how we can accelerate growing our construction workforce. We have put into play quite a lot of money to do that, and any additional ideas you have on how we can accelerate CTE excitement and engagement, What, things we can build on that we've already set in play, that would be helpful. Any other questions before,
Sure.
Eric, before we, turn to Jean? Great. Eric, thank
Just
Yeah.
real quickly on the point that you just made. The way we do that is by removing barriers to create new housing, to create the opportunities for people in the workforce to live here. We aren't going to do it throwing money at education. I'm sorry, but we're not. What we
Well-
have to do is we have people that want to work can't afford to live here. And so if we can remove the barriers and actually create opportunities for people to live here, those things will over time improve. We're a very small state with limited resources. We ain't going to throw money at this problem and fix it. What we have to do is remove the regulatory barriers that exist. That's the only tool we have as a tiny state like Vermont. We can certainly encourage the federal government to create programs that support what we're trying to do here and what the whole country needs, but there is very little we can do in Vermont with dollars. We need to remove the barriers.
Right. I think we agree, but I disagree with you. I think there's lots we can do in terms of growing our workforce. And we have a lot of young people now who are very excited about earning serious money and staying in Vermont and working in an industry that actually supports them with a first class paycheck. So I
don't think the demographic data supports that assertion, but I do appreciate where you're coming from.
Anyway, I think we need to pivot to Jeannie. Jeannie, would you like to join? And Eric, please stay with us. We'd love to have you stay with us in the course of the rest of the conversation. Jeannie, I'm trying.
So I am, I have no presentation, which is good. Because I really would just agree with Kurt, and I'm gonna agree with Eric on the cost side of what we've seen. And I was just mentioning to Kathy, actually in the 80s, I served on Governor Cunan's workforce development group because the problem was seen back then. In terms of solving the crisis, I don't have a lot to offer other than all the ideas in this room of people with good hearts working on it. I will say that I think we are approaching a crisis point on pricing for all the reasons stated.
Yeah.
And even yesterday or last week, we got notice of more price increases coming. But the prices aside and the labor shortage aside, I will say that we also have a very nuanced environment in Vermont. We have unique sites that might have the site work cost more. We have unique sectors where if the private sector can't develop, we know we're on halt phase on if you can't make a pro forma work, then you're in crisis.
Right.
And then leaning on the public sector, I've been in my career, I've been involved in either building or renovating affordable housing for over 35 years. And every decade has had its challenges and there have been cycles. But what I will say is that this time to me is unprecedented in my career. I've seen the best of times really was when the publicly funded housing projects were happening during recessions because it was the only work in town. Bids were competitive. People were hungry for the work. It was a great moment. We haven't had that and nobody wants a recession. But in terms of that opportunity, when Eric talks about being ready for that opportunity, I think in some kind of visionary way, we should look at having money ready for a future moment where there could be more hay made. At the same time, we need housing now.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many public sector projects, and this is, I'm speaking as a citizen, many public sector projects where now's the time we can get them done. And I still haven't seen things cost less.
Right.
I still have not, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. And the other thing that's happening, and it's it's gonna happen fast is the aging workforce. So we talk about workforce training. We've had this problem in Vermont for quite some time, but the people of a certain generation that have spent their life gathering skills, it's a lifelong learning construction in the field, are trying to keep a stable group of younger people in it long enough to really learn and get them higher wages so that they stay in it. And what I can say is that's got to be created company by company, where the companies create a culture of embracing their younger employees and trying to nurture them and teach them. And because the reins are going to fall into their hands quite quickly and very soon.
Yep.
And that's the other thing that we've seen inside of all the various trades is the limited workforce has companies, people leaving one company to go to another. We've been blessed with an immense amount of stability, but I've watched inside the subcontracting world a lot of movement. And I think that we have to have the skill set, we have to have the workforce development, but we have to have companies embracing. And I've never seen this. This is the good news. I've never seen employees so valued. Okay, so I just have to give a shout out.
They're a precious
They are
commodity.
precious, and you know, that's the other thing inside of my career, and it's a silver lining about the humanity involved of seeing construction workers treated with dignity and treated as the valuable people that they are.
Oh, and CTE valued finally in
Yes,
I
yes,
have to say,
all of it all
right,
together. But I do think as a community, that there's gonna be a requirement to take care of one another, because I think we have, until whatever solutions or policy changes or opportunities we can create collectively, I think we have to value one another inside of the role that each, whether it's the legislature looking for a wisdom inside of an overarching vision to drop barriers, and or create possibly, if you can accomplish the 15 things the state or the town, maybe we begin to say you have to hit 8 out of 15 points in order to
Right.
and open up creative mechanisms for the public good. So if you look at every reason we've got this rule,
Great idea.
is we think that there's a public good that the community should require of you. Well, maybe there's a project that meets part of it, but not all of it. And allow people in the community to meet that by hitting the high notes of the contribution that they're making. And I'll second what Eric said about my employees, housing. I have employees now that have been served by the housing community, helping them get from nothing to home ownership inside of many well-conceived and wonderful systems. My youngest employees, it's hard, it's painful to see what they're facing. But if we can't keep people here, if we can't house people here, but it's my way of saying, I don't think we have an easy solution. I think the most important thing would be for everybody to acknowledge this is a problem that is bigger than everyone, but together we can make the most progress possible. I'm a huge fan of the private sector doing everything creatively it can and being helped. I'm a huge fan of the public sector meeting needs that nobody else is going to meet. And I think that that's what we need to do together is support every good idea in front of us and not to be afraid that we don't know.
And to that point, before I go to Keisha, I would love to hear the most creative construction idea that you've heard about how we can look at construction off-site more efficiently.
Can I pitch something?
I'll leave on that in the back of my mind.
Yeah,
while
like,
you
why don't I
pitch us
think
something.
about it? So I've just been, I'm gonna say it out loud, and I think this is the year for it. I'm gonna scare everybody, except maybe Senator Brock and Senator Chittenden. I don't know, maybe I had the committee on this. I think we need to declare a housing state of emergency and get a lot of the permits and timeline processes out of the way over the next 2 years to actually build this housing. I really think when you look at not stopping a project because it's been appealed and doing remediation at the end, we need to be thinking, how do we build the housing now, get people out of the river who are drowning, and then sort out, what does the environmental remediation look like for that? What does that look like in tier 3 and parts of tier 2? We're going to get there. But we keep saying, well, we've done a little bit, let's wait and see. We've done a little bit, let's wait and see. We're not going to move 2,000 families, 2,000 people in families, 650 kids out of motels and into permanent housing if this is where we are. So I really want to look at this committee declaring a housing state of emergency and reducing any burden that isn't something that's federally required or will add years to a project, especially where we've said this is not a land use question anymore in tier 1. That's my creative solution, because I can't keep sitting here while people are homeless and rents are going up and the cost of timber is going up and the cost of everything is going up.
Right.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Can the legislature do that, or is that a gubernatorial election?
that's a good question.
Well,
I think it's a gubernatorial.
It's a mindset.
yeah,
I think it's a combination, yeah.
thank you.
And provided that if we declare an emergency, that we don't require a summer study committee to look at it before doing it.
It's okay, we're pretty clear. This committee is pretty clear on.
And the only other thing I just want to throw in, because as you've mentioned, I mean, there are a lot of different issues, including environmental issues or structural issues with soils. I mean, there's some things you cannot wave a wand and have them go away. The modular question.
Yeah.
I think that it's interesting. I looked at a couple of modular companies. They're not breaking any records over the costs that.
Sadly not.
They're not. And
Help
because
hope for somebody.
they can't either. But I would suggest there are moments where that's an ideal solution, but it's not an overall solution. So I think there's looking at each project and is this an opportunity for a modular solution? And it should present itself. Is it a private developer looking at it? See, this is the other thing, is that inside of private development, there's a great deal of freedom. Inside of public sector development, there's a great deal of limitation, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a reality. Maybe there could be a little bit in between, but I think that's the other thing, is we need to recognize which realm we're in and maximize it for its greatest good.
Jeannie, that's well said. Thank you, David.
If I could, I was recognizing that Eric was reacting to something quite negatively to something was being said about 4 minutes ago. I wanted to give him the opportunity.
Is it something I said?
No, I thought he was being very supportive of what you said.
I agree. I agree with you.
Yeah.
It was just prior to Keisha's comments. And I just wanted to give him the opportunity to voice whatever that reaction was.
I think it was about offsite construction and modular, and I was just gonna say basically what Jeannie said. We've looked at it a number of times, and I'm enamored with the idea, the concept, but every time we've looked at it, it's been cheaper to do conventional stick building than it's been to do modular. So I don't want anyone on this committee to think modular is like some magic bullet here, because so far it isn't.
Yeah, I don't think it's the panacea, but I'm discouraged that the modular, some of the hopes we had for it has certainly risen in cost, but I'm also discouraged that we have this site in Fairhaven that is empty that we could be doing and contributing to some of that construction. Anyway, it's I think for us to continue to explore and work on.
It's for what it's worth. I mean, it's been substantially more expensive than conventional construction. I also have friends that have experimented with it. I have a friend that owns a resort and built some, almost like an ADU type dwelling, little cottages to add to the lodging at his resort. And they were built in a factory in central Illinois. Everything sounded wonderful. And they showed up, and the code inspectors in Vermont said, this is all wrong. You got to tear this out and redo this and redo that. And they ended up having to spend all kinds of money to bring it up to Vermont code standards. So there's a lot of pitfalls in all of this stuff, and none of it's perfect.
Thanks. Yes. Thank you. Well, this is a great conversation, and not to conclude the conversation, but to sort of pull it all together. Let's invite Kathy to join us.
Thank you, Senator. For the record, Kathy Byer, Senior Vice President, Real Estate Development at Evernorth. We're a nonprofit developer that works in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. Today, of course, about Vermont, and I will be brief. The message has been delivered. I will submit this electronically. It's just a one-pager, so I thought I would just pass out. I will tell you that most developers do not share this level of detail, but I took a chance. Here is the construction bid numbers for two projects, and they are very similar. One started construction in March 2022 in Colchester, on Stewart Avenue, and Fox Run in Berlin, 30 units started construction in July 2024. And you can see by these numbers just the differences in hard construction costs. There's very little difference between these two buildings. There's no brownfields, there's no historic preservation, there were no gnarly permit issues. It is all in the hard construction costs. And at the bottom, I tried to illustrate that for a 2-bedroom apartment, it basically means that the hard construction costs are $135,000 a unit more from March 2022 to July 2024. And the sad news is that escalation hasn't stopped in 2025. You've heard a lot about it today. I just wanted you to see the starkness of the numbers and why we are hearing such overwhelming cost considerations. I know in our multifamily affordable housing, when we're saying you're spending over $500,000 TDC, total development cost per unit, it seems ridiculous. But when 350,000 of that is hard costs, and that's just hard costs, that doesn't pay for the architects, engineers, lawyers, land, permits. Unfortunately, the driver is the hard construction costs, and it means we're able to build less housing. You've done such an amazing job of investing.
$600 million.
Amazing.
It's just, we've never had that much.
We've never had that. We would not have gotten as far as we've gotten today without it. But we also are in unprecedented times, and I just hope this is going to stop. Because if it doesn't, we may have to, there'll maybe a real slowdown in building.
Well, which we already have. I mean, we already have a
yeah. So
it goes to treacle. I mean, it goes. And the challenge that I think we all, I think there's no one in this building that doesn't appreciate this. I think this committee in particular and House General have heard the intimate details of this crisis. And I think what we are always wanting to address are the things we can address and the things we can affect and the things we can. And I would hope everyone in this room who has a federal arm and is able to be lobbying at the moment is lobbying against tariffs that would be incredibly harmful to rebuilding LA, rebuilding and building new housing here in the Northeast. I think we face huge threats federally and the uncertainty federally in many of these cost areas is almost, Vermont's challenges pale like the
We're signing our first construction contract that has to have language relative to the tariffs. And ironically, it's for a project in Putney that went through the 2.5 years of appeals.
Yes,
and now
exactly.
Trying to break ground in March, and we have to deal with the uncertainty of the tariffs.
Right. it's heartbreaking. Just in terms of labor, because I think we would very much like to, because we can do some pieces, Eric, I know you don't necessarily agree, but we can do some pieces on workforce encouragement and workforce support, as we educate our young, and we need to look at, to Kurt, we need to also be realistic about the numbers in Vermont. I'm just curious, how dependent are your businesses on undocumented workers?
Well, when you use federal money, you have to make sure that that's not the type
So
of
the
workforce
affordable
you're
housing
using.
world, not at all, really.
And I wouldn't dare guess.
Can I spin that a little differently? How dependent are you on visa labor?
Yes, and well, that's an additional,
So control
that's the
immigration.
next question. How,
I'm a developer, I'm not a contractor, and go home and talk to your contractors.
I would say there's been an increase in the last few years in the roofing division and the sheetrock division. But on all the, as Kathy said, on all the publicly funded work, you have to verify, you have to verify the status. But there's an absolute increase in those particular
which
trades.
visa do you use? Because there are a bunch of different ones.
Well, none of our employees, but we have to verify subcontractors.
Eric, I see you have an input on this.
Yeah, we've seen the same thing in the last probably 5-6 years, increasing number of Central and South Americans on job sites, usually in framing, sheetrock, painting, roofing, some of those trades. Some of the subcontractors based in Vermont are tapping into those workforces. Sometimes it's subcontractors coming up from Connecticut, Rhode Island, Boston area. And we see most on our projects that don't include any federal funds or anything like that. A lot of the GCs are pretty diligent about making sure that everyone's documented at some level. I do know that there are some that that don't look at that as closely, but on the projects that I've been involved in, that topic has come up where we've said, "Have you talked to so and so, subcontractor? We heard they're pretty competitive these days." And oh yeah, but they're a little too fast and loose on their documentation, and some people just aren't comfortable.
I'm just curious if we have developed which visa. I know which visas migrant workers and resort workers have on who are temporary.
Yeah, you'd have to talk. I mean, Jeannie might know a little bit, but I think you'd have to kind of probably get down to the subcontractor level and talk to some of those.
Yeah, so we do E-Verify for all our own craft workers within the company. And as far as I know, there's we don't have any folks that are visa employees.
But what's the prevalence what lever in the immigration system are you actually able to utilize that helps you obtain the labor?
Yeah, so all of our employees are E-Verified, and then
Which means what?
so they have proper documentation. But then our subcontractors, if it's a federal job, there's certified payroll that goes along with that, and documentation for that.
But I think what David's getting at is like we know HB2 visa. We know visas for particularly the resort world and the agricultural world that bring people in a documented fashion legally for specific tasks. Has the construction world not created such a visa?
No, not my knowledge.
Because that's
Well, it's a visa. It's just not, we're limited nationally.
Right.
On a national basis.
60,000.
HGV.
Yeah. That's H2B, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But that is, and this is a tough time to be lobbying for the expansion of that, but it's also.
But everybody's got to speak with the same voice that we're going to solve any of these labor problems. We can't do it by looking at ourselves.
No, we need to, improve our immigration system and welcome people legally. Because we need them.
But I mean, to go back to the housing point, we just saw in the headlines that, you know, companies are trying to house people and they don't have great options to do that. And it's dangerous for the workers and it's precarious for the businesses. That, you know, we have work to do on housing, or it's dangerous at worst and just irresponsible and probably foolish at best to invite people to a state where they can't afford to live or to stay.
There's no argument here. I think we all agree.
And it's wasted money to spend it on workforce instead of housing.
And to tag on to that, many of our employers are building their own housing if they own land and if they are able to do that. But it's not that, you know, I look at our hospitals are doing this, you know, some who are capable and have the means to do it, but not enough. Anything else before we
Thank you.
wrap up?
Did I hear a commitment though to give us a timeline that kind of a Gantt, a visual to show
Right.
permitting sequence and maybe annotated with like, these are the problem areas, these are the sensitive spots.
And I think
Anything like that was-
it would be helpful for Kurt too, who did such a terrific compilation. It would also be great to add how you add the demographic of the aging demographic here, of course, is a huge piece of this, and the age of and the number of our students, which is on the decline too. So over, you know, looking at the other states, then they're facing the same decline. We are, the Northeast is in the same student population decline of students. We're not alone in that. So, anything else, committee, before we take a break? Right. Thank you all very much.